When James Evans got into Y Combinator, he brought his contrarian way of seeing the world with him.
The advice, don't do things that don't scale, has probably created billions of equity value, but I think it's slightly wrong.
He must know something though, because his startup Command AI has raised $25 million and has reached 20 million users in just 4 years while modernizing an old industry.
Don't constantly think of your thing as a new mousetrap. It's okay. It's not lame to see a big industry and go after it.
And his advice for other founders is super practical.
People spend way too much time deciding what to work on in a really early stage startup land and too little time just working on it.
He told me why founders should be okay looking dumb and what they should do instead of things that don't scale and why they shouldn't try to create new categories. This is James Evans' founding journey.
All right, James, what's up, man? How you doing?
Yo, good. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. So want to start going way back, right? To your sort of origin story here as an entrepreneur, as a founder. Both your parents are business school professors, right?
Yes, correct.
Did you sort of plan to start a company and become an entrepreneur from those early days? Did they inspire you to do that? Or is it more of something that you found later in life?
So yes. And I was very exposed to the concept of being a entrepreneur or founder. There's this very embarrassing story. I remember I went to a soccer camp when I was 5, and we're going around in the circle saying what we want to be when we grow up. This is a true story. It's very embarrassing, and everyone's like, "Oh, I want to be I don't know, an astronaut," cool 5-year-old stuff. And I'm like, "I want to be an entrepreneur," and everyone was like, "What the is that?" Just heinously embarrassing. And I also grew up I grew up in Silicon Valley. Kind of a cool time to grow up in Silicon Valley though. My conscious childhood is 2000 to 2012 when, it was it was post, .com, pre SaaS perma bull market setup. So I kind of I always had that idea. And then I always had the back of my mind that I wanted to start something, but then I went to college and got a job, and I was one of those people who I wanted to start something meaningful. My new take on founders who have the itch to start something is just start something. It doesn't really matter what it is, and you'll find your way to something cool. But I definitely did not have that perspective. I wanted to wait for the idea. So I got a job in investing, joined a startup, and then it was only when that startup shut down that I was sufficiently unburdened to actually start working on startup ideas.
Building an audience is a full-time job, or at least it can feel like that when you're busy running your startup. But with AI making software easier to build, getting distribution is more important than ever. I can help. After growing my LinkedIn to over 40,000 followers and having 100,000 across all platforms, as well as a 60,000 subscriber newsletter, I know how impactful having an audience can be when you're building a startup these days. So I started Megaphone Studios, a ghostwriting agency specifically built for founders and their startups. Think of us like your startup's chief content officer. We turn your LinkedIn, X, or newsletter into a machine for lead generation, follower growth, and building your influence as a thought leader in your space. Our process is super lightweight for you while still delivering content that only you uniquely could write. And our plans are flexible with no long-term lock-in, because we know how fast things can change at startups. Oh, and I brought my buddy Blake Emal along to help me run the business. And he has even more followers than I do. So email me at hauk@megaphone.network and mention the pod for a first month discount.
You were working on something called Code Post earlier, right? How did that go? What was Code Post? Why did you sort of move on from it? I think when I was looking into this, what I saw was that you built a ton of features into it, and it became super hard to use because there's so many features built into it. So did you take lessons from that for Command Bar? What was that experience like?
Yeah, it was basically it's the origin story of Command Bar. So my two co-founders of Command Bar, Richard and Vinay, we were both working at this crypto startup called Basis. And so when it shut down, we were all three of us no job, ready to work on startup ideas. And frankly, that was part of the appeal of going to work on a startup together was oh, okay, well, we can eventually we'll see where this goes, but if it doesn't go well, we can start a company together. So CodePost was a project that we actually built in college along with my advisor, was a tool for like providing feedback on computer science coursework. So a tool for teaching computer science, basically, or like a student project. And it was used at Princeton and a few other schools. And so when this company shut down and we were looking to work on startup ideas, we kind of were like, oh, let's just take this one we've already built and like turn it into a business, because it was a cool product and like we've been working on it for years. And in some ways, I think like we had so little like experience in the world that we didn't like have many problems to solve other than like the problems of being a student, you know? Like I think this is why so many young founders do like ed tech and like restaurant tech, because like that's all you know. So yeah, we worked on that for like a year, and the way we got from that to Command Bar, it seems like they're like totally unrelated, it was just the three of us. We were like jamming on this ed tech thing. We had like no competitive advantage other than like speed and like opinions. And so people would write to us in Intercom, be like, yo, you know, why doesn't this work this way? Or can you support X? And we provided like the most amazing service of all time. Like, yes, that afternoon, like done, just feature after feature after feature. And eventually they just made it really complicated, like you said. And we didn't really have a way of making it less complicated. And we built this. So as a result, we built this search bar thing into our UI inspired by some other products. And that was our solution. Like users could just search for what they were trying to do. And then that was the UI, basically. That was on top of the UI. And we just got so obsessed with this idea. We were like, oh, maybe this should be the company we work on instead of CodePost. So we applied to YC with that idea.
How should a founder know when that moment happens? Because I feel like it reminds me of the Slack story, right? They're building this game, and then
this came up during fundraising. I remember some people were like, "Oh, it's like Slack," and I was like, "Yeah, it's exactly like Slack. Yeah, keep going."
Always a good comparison to make to a $1 billion company founding story. How can a founder sort of recognize when that moment is happening? And
I think it's kind of a vibes thing. Ultimately, I think that it's easier when you haven't had like that much success. And so I think if you're still like pre-product market fit and things aren't like working, then I think you just like kind of follow your nose. And I like the explore exploit framework. Like you're either exploring and you're thinking about ideas and you're assessing which is more exciting, or you're exploiting and just like heads down working on something. And I think my advice when people like are feeling like, oh, I'm at a crossroads between these two things, I'm like, it's not really a trap door. Like go work on this other thing for a quarter, heads down. Don't think about whether the other thing might be more interesting, and then surface up and you have way more data. I think people spend way too much time like deciding what to work on in a really early stage startup land, and too little time like just working on it. I think it's because a lot of founders are like smart, creative people, and they don't want to waste their time, and they have a high opportunity cost. And so I think the way this surfaces a lot is people will be like, oh, I have this cool job, but I want to start a company. I'm not sure if I have enough conviction. And I'm like, you just got to decide if you want to start a company. Like you're not going to build sufficient conviction like from 5 to 9 p.m. after your day job to like, no, this is the idea. You just got to like get in the arena, and like, you'll see if you like, doing the startup thing. You'll see if the idea works. If it doesn't work, like, but you got to take that risk.
Yeah. It reminds me of what we were talking about last year when we did the whole newsletter piece on you guys at Command Bar and your story. And we talked a lot about why creating a new category is overrated. And I thought that is antithetical to, I think, some of the advice Peter Thiel gives, where he's like, oh, competition is for losers. Your take is, hey, just start moving, just start doing things. But talk to me more about that.
Yeah, doesn't feel great to be on the other side of the debate panel to Peter Thiel, but I'll do my best. I think I would say like I agree with him that the best businesses are monopolies, and like are so. I mean, I think it's hard to disagree with. I think where we disagree is how to like reach the conditions to create one of those businesses. I think from the early stage, it's really hard. The team at First Round Capital actually has a good analogy I like for this. They talk about getting to base camp, which is like you've got a real company, it's working, you've got customers, you've got a team, call it early product market fit. It kind of roughly correlates with like Series A. And my take is like, I think it's a lot harder to get to base camp with a totally novel doohickey that no one knows whether it's something they should buy. No one knows how to justify the value. You're constantly having to invent playbooks for like, how do we talk about this thing? How do we sell this thing? Versus having a clear opinion on how you can make something that people are already buying better. And then I think from that position, you can decide, do we continue on the disruption path? Is there kind of enough juice squeeze there? Are we excited about that path? Or are we going to try to use like, suddenly people know about us, suddenly like we have revenue. Do we use that position to try to like move the market, bend the market towards like the thing we really want to build that we think is going to create value for the world, or like be ultimately like that great, monopolistic business? So I just think, what pains me and what I felt is like, I just think so many early stage founders get lost in the sauce on creating the category and they never make it. And they just waste so much effort. And I just don't think they know that like the thing is just do disruption. Don't constantly think of your thing as a new mousetrap. It's okay. Like, it's not lame to see a big industry and like go after it. And for some reason, I think there's this meme among early stage founders, like that your thing has to be truly novel. You have to like breathe life into this crazy new thing to be like worth it. And I felt that certainly. And I just don't want other founders to feel like that.
Yeah, no, I felt that too. Where do you think that comes from? Because I agree. I see that everywhere. And the less education you need to do for a stage founder, the better. So where does that come from?
I don't know. I mean, maybe there's some selection bias. Like founders are like smart, opinionated, like want to be creative. I think there's maybe an interesting like analogy, maybe like the copycat startups, like Grab. I would love to be the founder of that copycat startup. Like I remember at the time being like, oh, I would never want to start one of those businesses. Like, how lame. And now I'm like, that's so stupid. Like, those are amazing businesses. There's a lot of opinions there, a lot of intelligence and creativity to like make those businesses work in those regions. And so I think maybe there's an element of that. Like, it's hard to say, I think, how much of it is like American startup culture versus international startup culture too. I feel like there's a lot of like individualism and like, just Steve Jobsing your way to like creating these transformational companies. Yeah, I don't know. It's weird.
Everyone wants to be a genius.
Yeah, I think so. I think there's a lot of like people going to startups is because they see like they think they're amazing and they don't want anyone to like stand in their way if they're, and that's awesome. Like, I love that. I think that's a great reason to do a startup. It's just like, don't hold yourself back by packaging your amazing insight in like this weird package that people have never seen before. So it's hard for the market to appreciate.
Yeah, don't make it harder on yourself. What are some signals that founders can look for to know that the market actually does exist and does want a better mousetrap rather than a whole new mousetrap?
I just think it's super rare for a software. All I know is software. For a software market to have large incumbents that are not even universally hated, like universally like meh, and that not to be an opportunity. Like, just, I think there's so many markets like that where you look at the market leader and you're like, yeah, that's not like a formidable company. Like, I don't know. I've now seen some companies competing with Stripe and I'm like, okay, that's like a pretty formidable like market leader. Like, I don't know if I would, but I don't know payments that well. Like, maybe there's chinks in the armor or whatever, like certain areas where it actually does make sense to compete with Stripe. But there's so many markets where like that extremely, formidable giant like doesn't really exist. I think the problem is less like identifying the market. I think what's not obvious is how you go from that observation of like, this is a market I should try to disrupt, to like doing it. Because I think what's cool about the new mousetrap category creation thing is it's very like build it and they will come. Like, it's very like producty. It's like, oh, go build the thing. I can do that. Because most founders, first-time founders focus on product, second-time founders focus on distribution. Like, that's what most, I think, people want to do. Whereas the disruption playbook is very like second-time foundery. It's very like, oh, I'm going to go do sales and I'm going to like get people aware of my brand and I'm just going to build a shitty MVP and I'm going to iterate. Like, I just don't think people know how to do that, and I don't know why they would. Like, you kind of have to have worked, I think, in the industry to know how you go about building a company like that. And so that's why like I try to write about it is like, no, this is how you do it. Like, you have an opinion. You build an MVP around that opinion. You don't try to get to feature parity. You talk about your, status quo us message and then you run. I think that's the part that people have trouble intuiting.
Yeah, I think a market where the leader is where customers are indifferent about the leader is way more easy to attack than one where they hate the the leader but still have to use it, right? Because it's like Bill.com, classic example of this. Everyone hates using Bill.com, but they still use it because they have great network effects for invoicing. And
Right.
payments.
Network effect. That's a great reason to look at that market and be like, oh, it's going to be hard for me to compete with that. But there's just so many markets where like there's no network effect, and the mode is like good software. Like, I don't think good software should be something that detracts people from competing.
Yeah. Another early stage sort of, truism or common thing that you talk a lot about is doing things, the difference between doing things that don't scale and doing the things that probably don't scale, right? So what is that difference?
Yeah, the advice, don't do things that don't scale, like, has probably created like billions of equity value. Like, it's just such amazing advice, but I think it's slightly wrong because of the don't part. Like, I think people have this, a lot of early stage founders, this is more like an approaching PMF question. Like, it shouldn't, if you don't think you're a PMF, like, you shouldn't be thinking about doing anything that scales. Like, a lot of people, I think, get lost in the sauce of being like, oh, okay, we're doing this today, but because this thing doesn't scale, like, what am I going to do in the future? And it's like, yo, it's just lazy load that, like, earn the right to care about that problem. I don't think it's do things that don't scale. I think it's do things that might not scale, because don't implies there's like a clear phase transition where it's like, oh, we got to $1 million of ARR, like we raised our Series A or Series B or something, and like now it's time to switch to like scale mode. And I think this is kind of the spirit of the advice. I think the better pattern is like, just do it until it really breaks. And I think it follows with this general pattern of advice where, especially like VC in VC backed land or founders who raise a lot of money, I think there's this temptation to like think about company building as, I'm at this stage. What do companies at this stage do? Like, who should I go hire? I remember asking this to our investors after we raised our Series A, like, who should I hire now? Like, what does a Series A company look like? And there's some roles that like, oh, I didn't know that existed. I didn't know I could hire someone to write docs or something. And that's useful advice. But in general, I think the much better advice, and which is ultimately what I got, is like, don't hire people because you feel like you have the capacity. Hire people because you've got like a burning need. And I'd say the same thing about doing things that don't scale. Like, just stop doing it when it's like really painful and not working. Like, one of the things we do is we just spend like so much time with our customers, which is kind of like antithetical to the support mindset of like, be efficient and like support is a cog. So like minimize it, but I would just get so much value from like, we have side channel with every customer. We like swarm. We're always offering to get on the phone. We'll do like weekly meetings with our customers if they'll do it. If not, we'll do bi-weekly meetings. And sometimes we just shoot the shit and like, could we reduce headcount and like be more efficient? Like, absolutely. And that would be like the thing that scales. And like, eventually we'll probably have to do that. But like, for now, it's great. And like, it's messy and more work, but like, we just learned so much and we built this great relationships that I think it's worth it. And I think if that's the kind of thing that if we had this mindset of like, oh, what is this part of the company? Like, has it earned scale yet? Let's architect it to be ready for scale. We would have stopped doing that. I think that would have been the wrong decision.
I like that. When you're, and I've seen that firsthand actually, because when we started with Command Bar for Megaphone, you literally got in the chat with me right away and helped me set it up and all that stuff. It was super easy. So
it's the only way. It's like one of the only things, especially going back to like just competing, like this is what PG says, like that's one of the only things you have as a startup. I just think it's also one of the only things you have as like a growth stage startup, like just keep it going.
When you're spending all that time with customers, or also when you're hiring the people to maybe do these roles too, I always find that open-ended questions are super important. And you've talked about this too. What's your take on like the importance and relevance of open-ended questions for founders specifically?
Everything. Open-ended questions are everything. Shout out Chris Voss, Never Split the Difference. Great book. What is an open-ended question? An open-ended question is one that doesn't make you sound smart for asking it. I think a lot of founders like have this, or probably people who are like me, who like grew up, doing well in school and like that being a part of your identity. And I think when you're like that and you're in a high leverage conversation in any context, that could be an investor conversation, that could be a prospect, it could be your team. Every question is like kind of an opportunity to sound smart and like show you did your research. And I'm not saying there's like, a well-researched question isn't like a good idea. I just think so much of doing a startup is like extracting how other people are thinking. How is your team, on the same page as you? about what matters. Does the investor you're talking to like at all understand what your company does? Does the prospect, are they comparing you to another company? How do they feel about your product? Like that's what you're trying to get. And I think the open-ended question, how's the trial going? You know, how are you feeling about the product? I could ask that with zero research, but it gets people talking and it starts a conversation. And so I now look for every opportunity to, and what's great about the open questions, they also require less research. So it's like a win-win. You get better results and you don't have to do as much time prepping. So yeah, it's one of my life hacks.
Okay, so let's share the life hacks a little bit. What are some impactful sort of open-ended questions that founders can use in different scenarios that you like to use?
Honestly, it's a lot of variations of how's it going. So like with the team, it'd be like, what are you most focused on right now? I kind of know what they're most focused on right now. Sometimes I think they're like, why are you asking me that question? Don't you know? But it starts a conversation. Same with could be a customer. Like, yeah, what are your big goals for the year? Stuff like that. You can open a sales call with that. People are going to be like, oh, but then they're going to talk because it's awkward if they don't talk. That's, I think, the key to the open-ended question is it's like, it kind of tees up the other person to like just share what's on their mind without providing too much leading. Something else I like is things that get at emotions, like steer the conversation towards emotions. Like you're in the middle of a trial. What's your favorite feature so far? Like, again, I could have gone in, I could have been like, oh, it seems like you're using X, Y, and Z. Like, have you thought about using it for this new use case? I was poking around your product and it felt like this flow was kind of hard. Like, have you thought about using this feature for this use case? That seems potentially more well-researched. It might steer them in a better direction because you want them to, but it's influencing. It's not extracting information. So I try to, spend more time extracting information than I do influencing.
Yeah, it comes off more authentic because if you're doing the other way, the more leading question, they can usually tell that you're sort of trying to sell them a bit, right? So I think we've talked a little bit about some of your maybe, not necessarily contrarian, but your unique viewpoints on a couple of
I
these.
try not to be contrarian by design. I hate those people, who are like always the people who disagree with status quo just because.
Yeah. No, I wouldn't put you in that bucket. But
you.
I think you have a lot of what most founders are lacking in terms of being skeptical of some of those things and kind of approaching it from first principles. And that is a super important quality that founders should have. So my question to you is, do you think that everyone can develop that and should become a founder, or are there people who are founders and are not?
I guess I'd break it down in, I think everyone has the capacity for first principles thinking. I think, is that a required input to being a founder? I think like it kind of goes back to the how do you decide to disrupt a space or take on competition? And I think the core loop is just like see problem, validate if real problem, and then have the like kind of childlike response of like, well, why couldn't this be better? Like in our space, for example, I think it's like pop-ups are bad or chatbots. We just recently launched a chatbot product. Chatbots are bad. Like, are they actually bad? Like, there's kind of a meme around this, right? Like no one likes to talk to the chatbot that just kicks you to the documentation or says like, please wait for the team. But like, is that a real problem? And then you just talk to a few people and you're like, oh yeah, okay. People acknowledge this seems to be a problem. Like, seems like if users engage with the chatbot more, we could create a lot more value. And then ask yourself like, okay, let's just like, if I were using a chatbot, like what would I want it to do? That's basically like the loop we run. I think it also embedded in that is like a bit of kind of having a view, like being opinionated. This is, I think, key to doing the disruption approach. Like I'm going to play catch up on features and just like truly like compete with incrementalism, like doesn't really work, I think. So you've got some opinion, but you're also willing to like be the grinder and like lazy load features that customers want and like do sales. And I think those are kind of both required ingredients. So I'd say, yeah, as for ornery people who are like able to find problems and just like believe there can be solutions to them. And I think there's an element of business acumen too, like you pointed out earlier with the Bill.com example, like just being able to separate like, oh, there's a real reason for this like structural discontent with the status quo that's like hard for me to overcome. I actually think this was people did on business school or like jobs like consulting, but my first job was in investing. And I think it was super useful to like develop that skill of like, what's a good business go find a space with an incumbent that's not one of those and compete.
Yeah, because unless they have velocity to being a good business, then there's an opportunity for you to just out accelerate them, go faster and capture them.
Totally. And like, that's it. That's the 80-20.
Okay, so is that something that you felt from when you first started Command Bar? Like, how early in that process did you know that this was a space that you could come in, disrupt, create something big? And was that related to getting into YC and going through that experience, or was it something you just kind of had on your own even before then?
Definitely not before YC. I mean, we started as a new mousetrap company, so we did zero validation of market before like starting the company. It was literally just like because we thought it was a cool idea, and there was some like basic, we modeled the original Command K search idea. We modeled off of or our exemplar was chat. Ironically, now we're doing chat. We were like chat 10 years ago. There was no website chat. Now every bottom right has website chat. That's a new building block. We're going to build the next building block. That was the logic of the company. I think the thing that gave us conviction was we worked on that for like 2.5 years. That's still part of the product. It's not like we abandoned it, but throughout we just had so many conversations where people would be like, "Oh, can you replace, these digital adoption tools, these chatbot products?" And we'd always be like, "Shut up. Like, what are you talking about? Like, we don't do that. You're an idiot. You clearly don't understand our business. Like, we're doing something totally new." Pains me to like think back to those conversations when it's like, if we just said yes. I think just a lot of hearing that a lot, this just sort of general kind of discontent. And I think the other thing was there was a lot of I think we were able to have a lot of success with that initial product because it emotionally resonated with this problem of like, the status quo of helping users is bad and kind of annoying. Like that, people were really excited to like find something new. I don't think there was enough of those people for us to like build the company around, but just seeing that like emotional resonance to like, oh, thank God, this is like a new take on helping users. We really need something new. I think those two observations made it so that when we made the decision to stop trying to create a new category, it was like very clear in our minds, like this is a category that's these two actually, which are kind of separate, but both relate to helping users, are like really ripe for disruption. It kind of gets the idea of like a why now happens. It's a question people ask a lot in fundraising, like, why is this the time for your company? I think it's kind of a lazy question, honestly, because it's kind of like looking to de-risk the like, oh, if there's no why now, then like maybe this is a bad idea because maybe other people have tried this and it hasn't worked. But if there's some why now, then like, I'm not going to f up in that way by, betting this team to do this that has already been tried.
Yeah, it's web versus Instacart, right? It's the mobile app making it possible.
Totally. And we didn't really have that. And then I think we didn't need this to decide to stop creating a category and, repackage the product. But we also had the why now of AI. And I think that was like, oh, wow, we've really uncovered this problem. No one is really trying to compete differently in this space. And we have this new tool that we can use to make everything better. And like literally the tagline of our company is the natural language interface for software. Like, wow, like we got really lucky because we can now use LLMs to achieve that. So I think it was those ingredients.
Want to get more insights like that? Each week, I actually interview multiple founders. For the ones who don't join the podcast, I write up a case study and share it with all founding journey members. I also write weekly tactical deep dives, share startup opportunities, and analyze trends that I'm noticing. We've also got a community of founders, an investor and pitch deck database, and more fun stuff like over $60,000 in perks and discounts to help you build, grow, and raise capital for your startup. Go to join.foundingjourney.com to get access.
Do you think that it would have been as beneficial to go through YC after you'd figured all that stuff out?
I think it probably would have been more helpful. Yeah. I think we spent a lot of YC like building and spending a lot of time with like people in our batch, trying to get them to use our product. And this is the one thing I give as advice to people who are doing YC is like, everyone's going to be really nice. And if you ask someone like, do you want to consider using my product? Everyone's going to say yes. And month one, everyone will say yes. You will then spend like 2 weeks trying to schedule with them. They will like be nice and give you feedback. And ultimately they will not use your product. Also, by the way, like you probably shouldn't be trying to sell to like 5-person YC companies. Huge. So we spent a lot of like wasted time on that. I think if I were to do YC again, I'd be much more in like go to market goblin mode and just like, do outreach and like get my partner's feedback on the outreach and like try to work the network and like just use it as an opportunity to turbocharge like go to market, as opposed to, for me, it was like the first time I'd been around other founders. It was also like COVID. So it was just like a weird time. And I got a lot out of it, but I think the YC playbook that I would run as a second time founder would be much more tactical.
Yeah, you did the summer 2020 batch, right?
Yeah, first intentionally remote batch.
Obviously, since then the deal has changed, right? What are your thoughts on the new deal? Would you have preferred that?
I know a lot of founders who love, like, I think the old model, like the spirit of it was like, let's allow like a small co-founding team to like pay themselves for like a small period of time. And I think that had like become not what the upfront 125K was like able to do, really, especially if you're like in the Bay Area, which I think everyone now comes to the Bay Area, at least for YC, to do again, which is great. So I think in that sense, it's like probably a good thing. I think it's also a good thing that it kind of signals that like, if you're going to give people all much more money, then, you probably aren't going to fund like 1,000 startups. And I think there's this great debate around like whether YC can scale. I would love to see them be able to scale it, but I love to see like the conviction in a smaller number of startups as well. And the only other thing I'll say is I do remember there was a bit of weirdness around like, who is YC going to back, like participate, YC going to do pro rata for, which is like, it was just kind of weird. Like YC did pro rata in our seed and was great. But it was just like weird that like immediately there was sort of some kind of like value judgment passed. And so I like that that's deferred. Like they're making a higher conviction bet on the people they're letting in.
Yeah, I like that too. I guess, how has it helped with fundraising later on? Not necessarily pro rata, just like with the signaling maybe to other investors.
I think for other investors, it is extremely helpful for the founder who's not in like in the kind of investing world in group while you're like in YC and raising your seed. I think it's tremendously helpful. It just like puts people on the map. And I think it totally did that for us. And I think it does that for a lot of founders every batch. I think it ceases to be a signal after like Series A, just because, at that point, people are looking for more concrete. I mean, maybe there are investors, Series A investors out there, or Series B investors who do use it as a signal. But I guess I would question whether you should take money from investors who use that as a signal at Series A or B.
Yeah, always good to have a little bit of a filter on your side too.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so I guess more on fundraising for you guys. You did something which I love, and I think more founders should do it. You sent out a ton of Loom videos along with your like outreach to investors in the early days. Why did you do that instead of a deck? And like, what are sort of the pros and cons of that?
We had a deck. It was just very. I think TechCrunch actually wrote a great article about our seed deck. Like we published an article about it, and they like published a great article tearing it down. And their basic conclusion was like, this sucks. It was like really bare bones. And I was like, I don't think it sucks. Anyway, we can get into that. I just think a lot of our company was the product. Like we were 3 months in, we had like a handful of customers. The best thing about us was that we had this cool idea and we made a lot of progress on it in 3 months. And so I think that I started doing that because in our first few VC conversations, we found that the best ones, we just would screen share in the beginning and then just like stay on the screen share the whole time. And anytime someone asked a question about like how the product worked, we would just like show them. Nikita Bayer had a good tweet recently about like fundraising for a social product where he was like, just give them the phone, like let them play with it. Like don't explain, just like show. And I think that's kind of what we were trying to do. But frankly, the other thing was like, we did a couple of conversations early on where we would get to the end of like our pitch and the person on the other side would be like, oh, so this is like Alfred for Mac. And we were like, no, like what? Like, did you not just hear like B2B, like widget chat? Like, what do you like? No. And then we're like 20 minutes in and like, it was a disaster. And so it was honestly just like prep. It was like, yo, like, I just really want you to, get the basic physics of the product before we chat.
How many investors actually went through and watched those? Because you get notifications when people watch your Looms.
A lot. I think it just started getting around, like someone forwarded it. I think we had a password, but like probably like, I don't know, 30 for our seed.
I mean, what I love is that, if you send an investor a deck, they might spend under 30 seconds quickly flipping through the slides, reading the top line. When you put them in a Loom, they're captive attention, right? They're actually watching, actually seeing what's going on.
It's still an arbitrage. I think Loom is still like a hack for so much of company building, fundraising, communicating with the team, communicating with customers, communicating with prospects. Like we love Loom. We use it in so many scenarios.
Yeah, same here. I use Loom for Loom and Slack voice notes for just about everything.
You're a voice notes guy. Got it.
I'm a voice notes giver, not a receiver. Okay, so yeah, I mean, you said the deck was sort of, let's call it bare bones. I have found a correlation, very loose correlation between decks that are designed really well and maybe not being so full of substance, and then decks that are not designed that well. That sort of implies that the founder is heads down, doesn't have time to build a great deck, and that's a thing. So is that all true for you too?
I definitely think it's not there. I strongly agree, violently agree with the correlation. Like I've read a lot of I've read many more pretty decks than I've read the ugly decks. I think it's not causal. Like if you're good at design, by all means, like make it good. I think a few things. One is I think if you're not in the industry, there's just an assumption that like, oh, this is important. I'm raising millions of dollars. Of course, like my slides need to look good. And so I think people waste a lot of time that they should be spending on the substance doing the design. Number two, I think people make the mistake of not making the slides self-contained. They think like, oh, it's again, the Steve Jobs thing. Like it's like the keynote, like very like sparse design, like, and I'll voice over it. Mistake, because a lot of times people are just going to read the slide and not listen to you, even if you're presenting it live. Make the slide self-contained. That makes them uglier because there's more text, but I think it's better. And then I think the third thing is like, I think people think that there's a difference between convincing an investor that your idea and business is good and you're a good founder, and like convincing yourself of those things. It's something my co-founder, Vinay, talks a lot about, or it was a huge influence on me when we were doing our seed, was just like, these are the same thing. Like, let's just decide why we're excited and then put that into some slides. So if you look at our deck, it's like, there's basically like one slide, which is just text. And it's like, this is why we're excited about the business. It was like 4 or 5 things. And that was why we were excited about the business. And we had conviction in that. And like, I think if you aren't able, or if you aren't able to come up with that, like that's obviously bad. I think most founders would be able to come up with that. If you feel like you can't share that, like something is off. Like, if you're able to convince yourself and those words you think of no chance of convincing like an investor to give you money, like something is off. Like either maybe the idea is not good, or like you need to get advice from someone else. And like, why it's not it's just, I've very rarely looked at a deck where I've understood why the founder has conviction. And of course I may disagree, but it's like, I just think that's what fundraising at the earliest stage is.
You always have to make sure as a founder not to sort of drink your own Kool-Aid too much.
And again, I think it's a status quo thing though. I think people don't know that they don't have to, like, people think like, oh yeah, it's like Shark Tank. I don't know. Like if you just haven't been there, I think it's super reasonable to think that. And that's why we wrote the article about our seed deck. It was just like, whenever I just sent it to founders, be like, yeah, this is all you need to do. Like, trust me, like it's okay.
You've made some investments now too, right?
Yeah, I started angel investing.
Yeah. How's that been? Like, what have you sort of learned on the other side of the aisle that you wish you had known when you first went out to raise?
I don't know if I've picked up anything. I think what's fun about angel investing for me is, first of all, I think there's this kind of weird, like, I think some people view angel investing as like something you do when you've like made it. And I actually think it's like, and I think there's a lot of people, I'm not unique in this, people are catching on. But like, it's such a great way to meet other founders and like also just like step into their businesses and like learn stuff. Like I learned stuff in a lot of investor updates I received from like really early stage investments, just because like now I have this group of smart people who like know me, and I'm incentivized to help them. And it's been great from that perspective. But yeah, it is kind of like startup therapy in a way, to like, you get so in your head about your own company. It's just really nice to step into another one and like think about it deeply and get the perspective of the founder. From a fundraising perspective, I think honestly, what has maybe frustrated me about angel investing is you encounter a lot of people who are such great people and have such great ideas, and just have like they'll do the thing where they like create a 30-page deck, and just because like no one told them, they didn't have to do that. And so that's like kind of how I frame my value prop as an investor. I'm like, yo, whenever you're like spending time on something and you're like not sure if it's, a classic example is like deciding on your first CRM. Like that's not something you should spend any time thinking about. You should just ask someone who's done that and just do it. That's like not a company. It's not going to some answer changing decision. And so I try to just be like that. Like I try to just ask founders I invest in like questions to tease out like what they're spending time on. And if it's like pre-product market fit and I'm hearing things like, oh, we're choosing tools and like we're figuring out our employee agreement, I'm just like, yo, like I'm going to send you ours and like please just use them unless you have like some really good reason as to why you should spend time on X. Just kind of like focus people and tell them it's okay. Like I'm kind of like with the deck thing, like it's okay not to spend time on this. Like conserve your creativity, conserve your like innovation for the thing that really matters.
Well, first of all, you're about to get a ton of like 8-slide decks sent to you after this airs.
Dude, give it to me.
But second, yeah, I know, I totally agree, because at the end of the day, when you're early stage, you have to limit the amount of time you're spending on basically anything that's not consequential. And so, you're going to have a ton of weaknesses at that stage. Like, I think a lot of founders struggle with prioritizing the right things, and that then gets them into trouble with investors too.
There's so many hard like decisions to make. Like I remember one thing I spent way too much time on was figuring out health benefits. Like what health benefits are we going to offer? And there's you can super easily create a narrative in your head that's like hiring is important. That I agree with. Benefits help with hiring. That I agree with. We should design the best benefits. Kind of agree, but like you don't have to design. No one, the odds that someone great joins your company because you have like a different type of, you offer this health thing that it's so unlikely that you should just find someone who offers, top 90th percentile benefits and just copy those. It's really hard to know like what matters and what doesn't if you've never done it before. So that's why I think every founder should try to find another founder who's like, they can text, who's like a stage ahead, who they can just like, multiple times a week ping with like someone just, say on this call, someone just send me a message being like, yo, do you have a one pager? Or a lot of our customers are asking for like one pagers. Amazing. Yes, I'm going to forward you my one pager. And then I want you to rip it off. Like, don't spend any time designing the one pager. Stuff like that. I think it's a huge unlock as a first time founder.
Yeah, I agree. You don't want to spend your time on anything else besides what actually drives growth.
Which YC tells you, like, just ship and talk to customers, but it's so hard. Like, you get in there and you don't know what's important. And there's also this element of like, everyone likes to cosplay big company. Like, it's really hard to avoid the pull to be like, oh, no, I'm a founder. I'm like building my business. I'm like invest in the logo, all that stuff. And yeah, just having that person who's like a text away keeps you focused, eyes on the prize.
Yeah, there needs to be some sort of like advisor matchmaking, one step ahead product, because I think a lot of founders would benefit. Because once you know what those best practices are, it's a good founder will logically just implement them and do them. Okay, so another thing you guys had done really well was you managed to get some really good logos super early. And I think that you mentioned to me that helped with fundraising. A lot of the time people will shy away from going after big logos early because like Moby Dick, right? It's like, oh, long sales, all out of your control. How do you guys navigate that?
Luck, honestly. Like if we just had people come inbound and then it snowballed a bit from there. This comes up actually a lot. People asked us in fundraising and I was just kind of like, oh, yeah. Like, I mean, I think it is a good sign. I think it's one of those things where like people talk about going up market. And I think if there's something like clearly from a top, I think I'll say this, from a top of funnel perspective, I think it's rare that there are discrete activities that you can take to like unlock bigger companies.
Mhm.
Like it's kind of the same activities, unless you're doing something really bespoke, like I don't know, sponsoring hackathons for startups. Like, okay, if that's all you're doing for top of funnel, like, okay, yeah, and you're not getting enterprise logos, okay, like makes sense. Like start posting on LinkedIn, start, just do like the basics. But I think the point there is like, if you're doing like marketing and it's not super specific and you're not seeing like any interest from big companies, like, I don't think you can't like, you're not going to figure out for the most part, I think there's niche industries where this doesn't apply, or there's like trade groups and like really specific things you need to do to be noticed. But I think in most, like, again, all I know is software. In most like software markets, that's not true. And so if you're not seeing the pull, it's probably because your messaging just like so the value is not there. And it's not going to come from like, you see this all the time, the SOC 2, so-and-so, we're now a SOC 2 compliant, like huge milestone in company history. Like doing that, sure, do the message, get the 100 LinkedIn likes or whatever, but like, that's not going to like do it when someone asks you, hey, you need to be SOC 2 compliant for me to work with you. Don't do it as a top of funnel thing. So I guess what I'm trying to say is like, in most markets, I think enterprises find you. To begin with. And then you discover, okay, we don't have these features. That's what we need to build to unlock the enterprise. But I think if you're sitting around being like, we need more growth, let's like go after the enterprise. And you look in your signups channel on Slack and you don't see any companies above 100 people, like I just question whether your product creates value for companies above 100 people.
That's the raw truth right there, I think, for a lot of books.
You need to build a new product. Like it doesn't mean you're like that could be a strategy. Like go build a new product that's more targeted after the enterprise. But I just don't think it's something that you can. It's not like you're going to find. I know because I've tried. It's not like you're going to find like the newsletter where all the Fortune 500 buyers hang out. Like it just doesn't. It doesn't exist.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Okay, cool. Well, hey, a couple of quick fires to wrap up here. First one, name and talk about an investor who you think the other founders should work with. Maybe you've personal experience working with them.
I love all of our investors. Maybe one who I think flies under the radar is Itai Tsidone. He was one of the co-founders of Lightrix. And he co-led our Series A. And what I love about Itai is he kind of plays that text away founder, should I spend time on X role that like I try to play for people I invest in. And what I also really appreciate about Itai, I think this is also true of all of our investors. I think honestly that one of the most harmful things that I've seen, again, not in ours, but I've seen this in other companies' investors, is like the overconfident non-operator investor who like pretends like they understand something that they don't. And then you run with that advice and like it turns out to be bad advice. What is true among all of our investors that I really appreciate is the like, hey, I don't know the answer to that question. I'm going to go find you someone who does. So helpful. Like, I think it saved so many painful cycles of acting on bad information. So shout out to Itai.
Okay, another one. Pretend that I'm a first-time founder. I've never raised money before, but I'm about to go start a process for the first time. What is the one piece of advice I need to know?
Ask open-ended questions. Treat the pitch not like a pitch, like a conversation. Do attention checks, like pull how the investor is thinking, and then have a conversation about those thoughts. Your goal is not to like deliver information. If you do think you need to deliver information, put it in an email or put it in a Loom.
And another one, you mentioned a couple tools that you think people should just sort of start out. Don't make too many decisions about what tools you need to use. Just pick one and go. What's one tool that you'd recommend, SaaS companies use?
What a setup for self-promotion.
No, can't say command.
Besides, your user assistance stack. I mean, Loom is amazing for so many use cases. I ask myself daily, like, should this be a Loom? In terms of SaaS, another great one is cap table management. I've seen so many founders like do multiple demos with like multiple cap table management. So we use Pulley, works great. simple. A lot of YC companies that use it.
Yeah, Pulley's great.
Just do it. Your company is not going to be any different if you, spend an extra week researching other cap table management solutions than just using Pulley.
Cool. And then last one, what is one thing you would change about the startup world?
Okay, so I was talking with my wife about this. I think a lot of being a founder or of taking the leap to be a founder is just knowing other founders, because I think people don't realize that it's like not that scary of a thing to do. Again, assuming you have like the financial means to support yourself for like a certain period of time. It's not, you don't have to have like certain properties to like try to do a startup. Like it's just, there's a lot of it is just deciding to do it. And I think that's so much easier when you can point to someone be like, I know this person. Like, I think of myself as better, I'm better at these things and maybe worse at these things in this person, but like, I understand them. They decided to be a founder. I can do it too. And I think that perpetuates holds a lot of people back in communities that don't create a lot of founders. It's a kind of self-perpetuating, like it's limiting in a self-perpetuating way for groups of people. Like, I think just, for example, I was talking to my wife about this, like, I think there's obviously way more male founders. And I think a lot of that is pattern matching. And so I don't know the solution. Like, maybe it's just like spending time with people who want to be founders and like realizing that it's just like, I'm not that special. And like, it's okay to, if he can do it, like other people can do it. But that really frustrates me because there's just so many like latent founders out there that like, if only they had like a friend who had taken the leap, like they would also take the leap. And that's like probably bad for society.
I mean, at the end of the day, entrepreneurship drives society forward. New businesses drive society forward. You have to, but as the founder, as the individual, you have to be able to go out there and make those connections. It's sort of like the first test, right? Can you go out there and jump into that world?
Totally. And what frustrates me is there's two sides of it too. Like I see, now that doing a startup is more popular, I see that a lot of people in my social group are kind of fair weather founders. Like some people will do, I call it like YC summer camp. Like people will do it and then be like, this isn't really for me. But the fact that they feel comfortable doing it, I think comes from the fact that they have so many people in their social group who've done it. And then I look at other communities where there's so few founders and only like the people with the utmost conviction end up taking the leap. And that's just, that frustrates me. Maybe it's some sort of like, again, maybe it's a megaphone kind of like co-founder speed dating, build conviction that, I'm special enough to start a company service.
Yeah. I mean, it's a net positive for sure that is happening more and those people do feel comfortable to do that. So yeah, I love that. Cool, man. Well, hey, thanks for the time. This has been great.
Great, Jam. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Where can people find you?
Commandbar.com. Or LinkedIn is the hot new social network these days, I hear. So there, or Twitter.
You heard it here first, guys. Go follow James on LinkedIn.
Okay. Gotta be cringe. If you're going to be a founder, you got to be willing to be cringe.
That is the truth.
Thanks for listening. I write up my main takeaways from every conversation and make them available to all of our members at foundingjourney.com, along with a bunch of other perks and more content. If you found this conversation valuable, subscribe to Founding Journey on Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, or whatever your favorite podcast app is. I post a new episode every Thursday. Also, consider leaving us a rating or a review. As a brand new podcast, this is the best way for us to get out there and founders to find us. See you next time.